Virtual Residency. So we have two really interesting writers today. Let me just introduce you to them a little bit. We have Collier NOGUES in Hong Kong, who's a poet, and she's published two really fine collections of poetry. If you haven't read them, go out now and get them. I really like them. The most recent one is "The Ground I Stand On Is Not My Ground," and the other one is "On the Other Side Blue." So you can sort of sense a little bit of the geography in her work. And she's also won a number of fellowships. She's been in Hong Kong now for how long have you been there, Kalia?
Almost 7 as of Saturday.
7 years, yeah. And I remember when Collier first arrived, and there was this great excitement. Somebody said, "There's this new poet in town. You have to meet her," and it was wonderful. And she's had fellowships from McDowell, from UCross, from Vermont Studio Center, and also from Lingnan University. And now she's teaching creative writing at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And we're really glad to have her with us today. And the other speaker is the novelist and writer and editor, Lavanya SHANBHOGUE-ARVInd, who, while she was in our MFA program, she's one of the graduates of the CityU. In fact, from the very first cohort of the City University program, she won the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2011, and for this terrific story called "The Crystal Snuff Box and the Papadum." And it was also broadcast on radio by Commonwealth Broadcasting. And her work's been published both in India and internationally. And she has this novel called "The Heavens We Chase" that came out with Rowley Books. So she's currently teaching at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. So something I wanted to get both of you just to talk a little bit about before we go to the readings. You are both, coincidentally, candidates for a PhD right now. Collier at the University of Hong Kong, she's working on experimental US anti-war poetry, and Lavanya at the in Mumbai, a PhD in women's studies. Plus, you're both also mothers.
Yes.
How do you do all that? You know, and you're right. And actually, Lavanya started an online publishing initiative as well, a very nice journal. So how do you guys do it? You want to tell us a little bit about that, especially now with COVID on, you know?
Collier, all yours.
Yeah. Well, I turn out to be either a person, I didn't realize this about myself, but I turn out to be a person who's really well suited for just staying at home all the time, which I'm very grateful for, because the alternative would be bad. You know, as I so many people are discovering about themselves, or like true nature about, are you a homebody or not? But right now, I mean, what I'm doing is trading work shifts with my husband and taking care of our toddler. She's 2. And it's, I mean, it's not easy. I think it's easier for me than it is for him, because I'm in the final stages of writing a dissertation, which as a poet, writing prose does not come easily to me. But at this stage, it's a lot easier, because I know what needs to be done. I just sit down and I have to do this by the deadline, and it's happening. Whereas my husband has a job, not just a be alone in your head and writing space job. So I think he's navigating a different set of problems than I am. But for me, there's something about breaking the workday into shifts and kind of turning off my writing brain and turning on my playing with a kid brain, which is actually, I think. I mean, it's good. I have little time to play on Facebook or something, because I have a deadline and I also have a child who's not allowed to look at screens. So,
that's actually very good.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it's sort of healthy and demanding in a way that I don't entirely regret, I guess. Although, of course, I regret the circumstances that are producing this. So,
Lavanya, what about you? I know you have a child.
Yeah, I have a son. He's 9 years old now. In fact, he was born around the time I was doing my MFA.
I remember that very well. Yes.
Right. So it's been interesting, and I've been my PhD is in gender studies and feminist theory and feminist writings strongly influence the way I think. So I've been recently dabbling with the idea of feminist mothering, you know, to raise a child in disloyalty to the patriarchal ways, but to raise a child and in a motherly way. I mean, to not deprive him of affection, but to teach him, you know, things like consent, and to teach him and consent, or to talking about something like consent. I think it should be taught as a life skill rather than as a theory, you know, like you don't, I mean, now he tells me that I need to take his consent to put broccoli on his plate, but yeah, but he gets the point and I respect it. And then we have this conversation that, okay, it's good for you, and let's see how can I get your consent to put broccoli on your plate. So that kind of comes into, so my husband says, I mean, it's just too much theory. You bring too much theory into the house, but it keeps me going, or I like it and I enjoy it, and it reflects in my way of living and being and who I am. So
broccoli is feminist mothering. I can see this now. It's a great image.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll get you to both talk a little bit more about your work and converse, because I think the two of you have written very interesting pieces. So I think I'll ask Collier perhaps to read first, and then after that we'll have Lavanya. So take it away, Collier.
Hang on, I have to get my other piece of technology set up. So well, first of all, have these pieces of writing been distributed? Or are they down? No, okay.
No.
So
we deliberately didn't, because these were commissioned, so they're yours. You know, it's we just commissioned them for this event. That's it. It's up to you if you want to share it, but we certainly don't have the right to do that. So it's with you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so then I'll just say a couple of prefatory remarks, because I think I find that easier on a blind listen, right? If you have a little bit of context. So this poem for me emerges from my sense in lockdown that time is going both very slowly and very quickly. And I think this is partly because, like I mentioned, I'm swapping off work and childcare shifts with my husband. And so my day is extremely routinized, right? Like I do the same thing every day at the same time. It's very scheduled. And so that kind of, you know, makes the days feel like they're just sort of disappearing. But at the same time, I feel like the ground is really shifting under my feet as somebody who lives in Hong Kong in particular. There are really momentous, gigantic things that are unpredictable and that make me feel very small, which are happening very fast. So those of you who are Hong Kongers or live in Hong Kong or have, you know, a lot of affection for Hong Kong, if you spent time here or not, probably know that this year in Hong Kong, we've moved very fast, very rapidly through a series of new normals, right? Like things keep changing and we keep being like, oh, well, this is how things are now, okay. And now, I mean, COVID was one element of that, but I think the stronger one is really what's been happening politically. And so in a situation where this national security law is changing how we understand the power of language and what we say and how we need to be careful in different ways, language is powerful differently than it was, you know, a month and a half ago. And that feels also very sudden, and like we're all kind of figuring it out as we're going along at the same time that the days are just blending together, so that it feels kind of radically different than time ordinarily does to me. So this poem came out of those feelings. So this called There Is a Season Waiting Behind This One. This morning began with soldiering, a battle, some heroism I dreamed myself into, out of these vague days, become pure routine. I led a drill no one wanted to follow, convinced no one, even with real fire behind us, smoking up the horizon, beyond which our sincerest hopes, beloved, backed down again. The radio switched on and off without our touching it. What came over the air was someone else's war, Or it was hours we began to make out, in the purple blossoms blooming, the red blooms waning, over the public pool backed by the factory block. The river is its own gauge. It's full as can be. It smells like a new town. The night a single law arrives to carry all of us, our beloveds, our children, our animals, forward. One animal left lifts her nose to follow. A war of language, like a sea war, like a drone war, like a war in the stars, making noise we can't hear. Though the drones are made where we live, their noise so close, their superhighway entirely lit, blinking into dusk, the yellow jackets swirling in a fog around the flowers. Not one of us could turn the corner as easily as that. Not one of us owns our own home, or hopes to. The police ask a man wearing black for his wallet. The police walk around in fatigues. No bloom looks the same to me under the sky, if I can see the sky, if it's the kind of sky that's visible above my government. What light it sheds, I try to follow into night and out again, surrounded by fellow citizens. I wave to them. The nearest ones wave back, then look straight up, setting down their well-worn umbrellas, now that umbrellas are no longer of use. Looking straight up, you have to open your eyes to see the clouds moving another direction than what you had expected. You have to keep your eyes open, even as rain fills up their wells.
Thank you very much, Collier. We can give her a round of applause. This is the thing I don't like about the non-live thing, is that we cannot applaud our readers, but so we will just silently applaud and maybe send memes and things like that.
Thanks.
Lavanya, can we have you read your piece?
Yes. Thank you, Collier. That was beautiful. Thank you. And I kind of sort of take thematically, I think there's a connection because we talk about geopolitical tensions and the government and war and things like that. So this one is called Misadventures of the Masked Kind, the mask that we are expected to wear now. So, oh masked one, why do you complain so? Yesterday, it was about your mask ruining your makeup. Today, it's about your makeup ruining your mask. It's a meme. I look at the picture of a bored, masked cat. The WhatsApp group is buzzing. People are complaining about people complaining about wearing masks. Someone has been talking about the moral thing to do. I want to say that at best, we are morally ambivalent. At our very worst, we are assholes. But I don't. I've always been a mute spectator here. This internet banter, this constant digital back and forth fatigues me. Someone has now shared a video of a group of people refusing to wear a mask. It's not normal. It's not natural, they say. It's not how God intended it, she says. Normal, natural. Long ago, a good friend was in an accident. She lost her left arm. When I went to visit her, she told me that she was officially a person with a disability now. How arrogant we are, she said. How arrogant the able-bodied are. We ignore all the poets and the folk singers, the philosophers, the painters and the artists, those who've told us over and over again that it's all transient, it's fleeting, it's here, and it's gone. You might call it hope or faith or optimism, but we all seem to believe in an impossible permanence of the normal, or whatever it is that we think is the normal. Who normalized normal? Who gets to say this is normal and that is not? Be wary of that, she said. Then she saw something in my eyes and felt offended. Is that pity? No, I said, but she was not convinced. She has more things to say. When invaders come, they destroy temples, almost as if to say that even your gods are at our mercy. Shrines are broken down, symbols are desecrated, the idols of our goddesses are particularly defiled. They are stripped of their jewelry and temple silks. When they are gone, the survivors pick up the broken pieces of their deities and reinstall them in what's left of the temple. It doesn't matter to them that their god has a broken torso or a leg or a hand, or that they were incapable of saving themselves. See where I'm going with this? She asks. Not really, no. A broken idol is still a god, but a broken human is somehow subhuman, an object of pity. If you want a white people version of the story, think of Venus de Milo in the Louvre. She's a double amputee. People queue up to see her. Next time you see a double amputee, please don't go, oh, you poor thing, how do you get by? Everyone's angry with China, but I'm thinking of the doctor who wanted to tell the truth to the world. I always thought that it's the boy who cries wolf who is punished. Our generation seems to have a strange relationship with truth. Some of us are so afraid of it, we'll always choose dare. Has everything become observer relative? Has everything become a battle of different versions? Chinese militia are at the border, some of them say. Others deny it. What's the truth there? The dotted lines on the maps, I'm told they are treaty boundaries, never finalized by law, just a couple of signatures by powerful men on a piece of paper years ago. Now those signatures are faded and there's a battle coming, another one. How many should we fight in one lifetime? What are these men fighting about? Land so far away from home, something that they cannot even take home for their children to play with. What's this obsession with ownership? We draw lines, stick a flag and call it ours. We produce a child, give him a name and call it ours. We build a house, draw up a title deed and call it ours. We sit on a chair in a waiting room at a bus stop or at the doctor's. We get up and go to the bathroom, come back to find the chair taken away by another. Usurped, we think. Our chair, gone. Who truly owns the things that have the ability to outlive everything? 2 summers ago, my husband traveled on work to China. When he returned, we sat together on the sofa looking at pictures of a beautiful Chinese countryside. Looks like a painting, I said. He had also brought home a painting of another landscape. Looks so real, I said. We want art to imitate life and life to imitate art. We even have the patience with imperfection and asymmetry, but not with falsehoods. Falsehoods are easier to spot than truth. That's why we know which stories, which fictions to go to during the lockdown. Which ones make us feel like it's all normal, so Netflix and chill, or make up your own stories. I don't know what's natural anymore. We who cook our raw food and cover our nakedness every single day. We who surface mine others' lands to the bone. We who make air so unbreathable that a guy in Delhi lets us rent oxygen cylinders for $200 an hour. We who send industrial effluents into water bodies that kill 2 generations of the Mahasir fish, which have now been declared endangered. We who will probably discard 1 billion used masks soon enough to fill up some landfill in a country that cannot say no to first world waste. We who are altering the naturalness of everything, their form, their function. We who attempt to constantly define normal. Do you know about the night flowering jasmine named Parijat? The flower is known as the tree of sorrow, for it blossoms at night and dries up at day, almost as if it is afraid of life. Why call it sorrow? For all you know, the tree is really, really happy. Which then is a true face and which face is really masked? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lavanya. So
Mm.
applause for that. Um, yeah, two really interesting pieces. I think of the two of you as sort of, these are like interrogations of a number of issues that you want to speak to. And what I really enjoyed in both pieces was the persona, the I. I mean, certainly in the poem by Collier, and in the sort of prose, I think of it as like a prose meditation that Lavanya wrote. So I'm going to start with that and ask about this idea of what Lavanya titled it, Misadventures of the Mass Kind. And Collier, you say there is a season waiting behind this one. So you're bringing us to nature, and these misadventures of Lavanya seem to be a meditative journey through life as it is right now and what you can observe. But the Collier also begins with soldiering, something so warlike, something so almost angry and fierce. And in a way, both of you are writing a kind of protest. And so I guess all these wars that you reference, all these mishaps, are they just a part of nature now? Is it that nature's just gone out of control? Is that what we're talking about? Who wants to take that first?
Well, I could, if that's okay. Yeah.
Sure.
So I was coming from the idea that I'm outraged by the idea of the normal, calling this the new normal. I think it's not normal that 1 billion children are out of school, and uh, people are locked in with their abusers, and mental health, people with mental health conditions are forced to isolate, and it's just not normal. And calling it the normal is just a giant act of self-consolation. We are craving for the routine, so we just want to just label it normal, the new normal, and the act of labeling gives us some kind of consolation, and we want that consolation, but it's just living in denial. And we have this broken relationship with the environment, and it's a very extractive and broken relationship, and we don't know what to do with it, and we don't know how to navigate it. So we write and we protest, and we do the only thing that we know to do. So that's where I was coming from, a place of anger and grief, and an inquiry into why are we calling this normal. It's a grave reality. So that's my uh, protest there, the nomenclature. Yeah.
What about you, Collier?
Yeah. I think, I mean, my sense of the title is that I want very badly for there to be a season waiting beyond this one, behind this one. You know, I want what's next after this, but wanting what's not happened yet is always dangerous. And especially after how things have changed in the ways they have. Again, you know, really thinking about Hong Kong, but also in the US. It's difficult for me to think about extending my imagination into the future, and having as strong a faith maybe as I have had in the past that things will be getting better, which is, I mean, awful, but also I think is kind of a common state. And I think very much, it's certainly not just me. And kind of to speak to your question about the environment, and to Lavanya talking about the situation of our human entanglement with not only each other, but with the environment, and our vast and gross failures of responsibility when it comes to that entanglement. I think if there is one thing that I feel hopeful about in at this moment in that respect, it's that it's impossible to have a discussion like this about political boundaries and wars of various kinds without also now talking about nature and the environment and our relationship to it. And that, we couldn't get 10 minutes into this conversation without that being very present, because it's in both of our works, and it's, I think, on everyone's minds. So that to me is heartening.
Well, certainly the daily weather report is something that gives me pause in a way that it never used to. It's because we just had a hurricane season here on the East Coast, and you know, in New Jersey, the power was out, and there's power out in a lot of places, and that's just, and we've had power out earlier this year too, and it's just kind of like, really, you know, is it really going out of control? So let's talk about responsibility, because both of you raised this question. Um, is it someone else's war, as Collier says, or is it or it was ours, really? And you know what Lavanya speaks to is a kind of mute spectating to all of this, and that we are at best maybe morally ambivalent. So, what about the question of responsibility? It's so big and so small. I mean, when we, you know, do something for the environment ourselves, is that the best we can do, or is it beyond us? Is the responsibility just humankind and it's failed? Let Collier go. We talk about
Yeah.
war. So,
I get called on.
yeah.
Well, this is what my dissertation is about. So,
Good.
I'm to not go on about that, but I do think I'm spending a lot of time lately thinking about the capacity for writers and writing, and poets in particular, doing things, kind of intervening with language to see, I mean, is it possible to do something in writing that makes a difference in the world? You know, this is kind of an eternal question. And obviously, of course it is. Like, that's kind of on one level an idiotic question. Of course it is, right? Like, everyone is inspired by writers that are dear to them. I mean, writers change the world in all kinds of ways, in this sort of like abstract way where, you know, we're the unacknowledged legislators, supposedly. But I really want to hold out some hope for the power of writing in particular to do something more activist without being written off as naive, as protesters often are written off, right, or very young, which is one reason I'm interested in really experimental poetry, which is trying to make connections between people, between different constituencies and different stakeholding groups with real stakes in what's happening in the world and what's happening around us. And so I don't really know how to do this myself, which is why I decided to write a dissertation on other poets who are doing it. But to answer your question in the most, like, I guess, straightforward and direct way, I think that yes, it does make a difference, the things that we do as individuals. But I don't think it's possible to treat any of this, as any of our wars, right, as a situation that is as situations that are possible to address on the individual level. Mm-hmm. I think that working in coalition with people, to come back to Hong Kong again, you know, a year ago in June, I took my husband and I took our daughter to the march that was 2 million people, and there's no way she'll remember that, but it's one of the most powerful things that I've ever done. And it was the first time I'd ever been to a protest with her. And every single person who was there is going to remember that forever. And it's going to change the way that they behave, I think, on many levels.
I think you're raising some very interesting points, because protest literature these days feels like the new normal in language. It's almost like you cannot write anymore without that protest somehow bubbling inside you. Let's see what Lavanya has to say. This about the moral ambivalence that we seem to be constantly courting. Yeah.
Right. It's a deeply confrontational sort of question, you know, how much are we really doing and how much can we really do, and is it enough? And this constant search for meaning, in a way, you kind of navigate into the deep philosophy of things. But it comes down, I think, in a way to what we do every day, the changes, or perhaps the mindful, conscious way we live every single day. So I was just reading about, I was talking to my mother when she was alive, and she would say that in the 60s or 70s, we would have like one trash can for the whole house. now you have a trash can in every room and one for the bathroom. So the kind of consumption that we are doing as people, I mean, our consumption is so high, and the waste is so high, and what we generate. So that kind of, it comes down to the minute everyday things that we are doing. And environmental consciousness has to be integrated with political consciousness, and it is about what governments are doing, because in India, just a few days ago, or maybe a week ago, they kind of diluted all the protective legislations governing the environment in a bid to bring in more foreign investment, and to seem the ease of doing business in India is great. So there is a protest going on right now as we speak, of course virtually, but but there is a protest, and we are part of that voice, and our individual consciousness has to sort of mingle and amalgamate into the collective consciousness, and we have to together be responsible. It's a collective responsibility, and it's a lot. It's sometimes, it really does get you down wondering if, is it too late already, or things like that. And when we talk about the environment and climate justice and all these big words, we look at who are the people who are causing the climate change, and who are the people who are affected by the climate change. The people who are least likely to cause the climate change are most affected by the climate change. The people who do not have the money to get on a flight or buy a car, or who are energy poor, they are the ones who are most affected by climate change. So there's a lot of injustice out there, and I feel very angry, and I think anger is a good emotion. So in defense of anger, if we can channelize our anger, I think that's it's good to have. I mean, I come from the land of yoga, which is, you have to not be angry, but I don't agree with that. I think it's important for social movements and for activism and for a cause. It's important to be collectively angry at a system that's letting you down every single day. Yeah.
I mean, aren't we angry? And that's why we begin writing in the first place. I want to raise the question that is a global one about capitalism, because both your pieces made me think about it. This obsession of ownership, what Lavanya was saying in her piece, but also what she said just now about this constant consumption, which is entirely brought about by the capitalist model of, the economics of the world. Or in Collier's poem, not one of us owns our home or hopes to. And while I can obviously hear a little bit about what property prices are like in Hong Kong, it goes beyond that. There's we see so much protest now, and a lot of it is about this financial inequity. The fact that maybe 2% of the world owns 80% of the wealth. You want to talk about that in your work?
Well, this, I'll start out, since I guess we're like kind of alternating back and forth here. I mean, this reminds me too of Naomi Klein, as a philosopher and I guess also an activist, who has several books. And one of her points is that to imagine that individuals are the people that our individual actions at home, like recycling more, can change or can sufficiently address climate justice, is actually kind of a symptom of late stage global capitalism, right? This idea that you as a single person can, well, you're not recycling enough, so we're all screwed. Like, that's not true. What's true is that we have oil and gas companies, fossil fuel companies, and government interests, which are vast and deep, and which actually can respond to collective action, right? So there's a sense of personal responsibility, which is a very American ideology, right? I mean, it's shared by many, extensively by other participants in the sort of global neoliberal order. But that to me is a really important point. And she also makes the point that in many places, when people want to make governments change, they do it through, remember, unions, right?
Remember
Like collective
unions,
action is like
yeah.
how it happens. Yeah, it's not through one person making a decision to do, buy less X or eat vegan. Although of course those things are helpful, right? Like you shouldn't like throw in the towel with that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I think if we're imagining any kind of alternative future, like it has to be something that we do together.
Lavanya? I mean, India is definitely the land of trying to like bring in every foreign investor under the sun.
Yeah. Well, thanks for talking about Naomi Klein. I use her in my work. Yeah. So on the shock doctrine and the disaster capitalism. I mean, this form of capitalism that's pervasive today, and we are the huge class divide and the inequities that persist and replicate over all these years. So, and then you add other identities to that. You add, race or gender or caste or religion or ethnicity, and people are so much more disadvantaged and disenfranchised. So the pandemic sort of reveals the dirty underbelly of our society, because who are the people who are filing for unemployment, and who are the people who are in the front line fighting this war against the pandemic. In India particularly, 60% of sanitation workers who don't even have protective gear are women, and lower caste women, and minority women. And it's we need to look at who is it affecting, and to acknowledge my own privilege as someone who's even able to sit here with a stable internet connection talking to all of you, which is just maybe 2% of the population when we are a large country. So to constantly question who the capitalist way of thinking, and the fact that it's infiltrated everything, everything, and what do we do about it? And yeah, so I get labeled a communist and all kinds of things when I try to make this argument. And then I say that, well, like, you may not like the Marxist diagnosis, I mean the prescription, but his diagnosis is spot on, so it's, you might not even like Marx, that's okay, but it's not about being a communist. It's about asking the right questions, and asking questions about who is benefiting from this system and who is continuously being disadvantaged over and over and again, like this intergenerational inequity. So that bothers me, and I'm in the activist circles a bit myself, and I get called all kinds of names, but that's okay. It's worth it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because thinking about government responsibility versus the personal responsibility. The shadow of China looms really large because, on the one hand, we have America blaming China for the Chinese virus, so ridiculously. But on the other hand, I find myself these days thinking back to early Mao, and the Long March and the very communist ideology and communist idealism of equalizing people. Not obviously, we see the results today, which is a kind of communist capitalism, and I'm not sure that that's any better, but it's what we have. But this we that embraces the government as well. Certainly, you're addressing the role of government and the question of this oxygen cylinders at $200 an hour. Again, that's more of the capitalist system, or the generations of the Mahisa fish that's endangered. And whether or not in Collier's poems, the sky is visible above my government, and you also make reference to umbrellas we no longer need. Again, a nod to the political problems that we've had in Hong Kong, or the not problems so much the situation and the protests. You want to talk a little bit about the governments you're both sort of talking about in a way?
you want to start this one, Lavanya?
Yeah.
The
Well,
Indian government there's a lot we can say there, right? Yeah.
they're absolutely outrageous, and I can say that it's a right-wing populist government who love Trump. I mean, that should give you an idea. And they are extremely, they brought religious fundamentalism into the mainstream public sphere. And there's a witch hunt against minority communities, and a witch hunt against poets and activists and writers, who several of my colleagues have charge sheets against them. They've been formally charged, and it's a very bad environment politically to live in, to be a contemporary sort of writer. Uh, there's a 80-year-old poet who's tested COVID positive, and he's in prison, and because he wrote against the establishment. So it's an extremely, so the government is like this large looming many-headed monster, and the nexus with the corporations. So it's this capitalist state nexus, and which is impossible to sort of break, and to kind of speak the language of humanity to this group is becoming very, very difficult. So I was talking to this poet friend of mine, and she said that the only way we can, all the men who put children in cages and draw these lines and get into this fascist mass murdering, fervor, they need to cry. So it's only when the men get together and cry for humanity can we heal as a world. And I thought that was powerful, because the power of tears, they should actually feel empathy and grief for what's happening to everyone. Yeah. So
I think mothers know what it is to cry. I thought it was interesting to pair two mothers for today.
yeah.
Collier, what about you? You're sitting in the middle of a political
So you
minefield.
You bring up mothering, parenting, and I have been thinking, when I think about my governments, which I like I said, I'm about to be eligible for permanent residency, and I intend to apply for it. And we had been excited that perhaps we'd get to vote in the September elections, and then the timing doesn't work because you have to register to vote long before we would actually be eligible, if we're only eligible in August. But now we will get to vote in these elections because they've been postponed for a year, which is, not the circumstance under which I wanted to be voting. And so it makes me think about, again, to return to language, and especially poetic language, I think about the sort of double speak that governments are very good at. And so, I mean, on the American side, I think of things like George Bush saying, the second George Bush, about the invasion of Iraq. I think it was in 2003, he was explaining it. The war is really about peace. This kind of amazing circular logic, which he seemed to just, he said this at a press conference, and he just seemed to think, he totally believed it and thought everybody was going to buy it. Well, that's why we're there for peace, like, yeah, okay, we're there for oil, but whatever. And then I think, of Carrie Lam saying, reassuring everybody that, the security law is only going to affect very few people, just like the really bad apples, basically, is, kind of a colloquial version of what she said. And then, it comes to be that the law is passed, and who is a bad apple is defined by who the law catches, and it's like extreme vague limits. And so, what she said is not false, but it is also its own logic. And I've been thinking about this differently recently, because my daughter is just getting to be old enough to make jokes, and the jokes that she makes, she'll point at a blue thing and she'll be like, "It's green."
Wow.
And she just cracks up. And I was just like, wow, you are learning that language is not only literal, and you're learning to use it kind of the way like Carrie Lam and George Bush can use it. It's not only poetic technique to play with language in this way, and to like realize that it provokes a reaction, right? She knows she's not just using it to say that something is what it is, which is how she's used language to now. to date. But she's, you know, it's also a political deployment of language. And that's very peculiar to watch another person kind of come into this understanding that language works this way. So.
Yeah. Lavanya?
That's interesting. I mean, the use of language and the deployment of language, and it sort of is a tool to create a certain kind of consciousness, especially when governments do it. I mean, if you just see the language being used, is what you said about Bush, this war is about peace, sort of. I can't, that's outrageous, but yeah, something like that, where we are doing all of this so that all of you can be happy, you know, or that there is this modernist idea of development, and where we become developed. We no longer are underdeveloped, but we are developed. And I'm like, developed how? What are you developing? I mean, it's like you're going back 300 years with all your bigotry and your prejudice coming out into the open, and all the solidarity built since Indian independence has been sort of erased and buried. And but you're talking about development. I mean, so it's very so the language of development, or the idea that is being sort of peddled is sort of the way in which language is bent, and it's sort of pliant in their hands. The people who have power, they kind of, it's like clay, you know, you can say whatever you want, and then people just buy it, and then you're the bad guy because yeah, and you can't go back to a point of ignorance. So that's the sad part. So yeah, in a way, yeah.
That's true. So
I mean,
one of the things that,
sorry,
Tammy and I had sort of agreed to, like, we have a few minutes left before our hour is up. So I just like both of you to talk perhaps towards something that you think of as hopeful. I mean, I hear in your poem the idea of keeping eyes open, Collier. So is that part of it? Or in Lavanya's piece, not fearing the light, which Tammy has just posted a little excerpt from Lavanya's piece towards the end, almost as if it is afraid of light, the flower that is known as the tree of sorrow. Should we just not fear the light, and should we just keep our eyes open? So let's do a final wrap up from each of you of something that maybe is hopeful. I mean, you're both raising children, so you're the people who care about the future more than those of us who will just die and that's it, you know. So
supposed to be true. I'm not sure that's true. I have a very hard time imagining a world without me in it and just with Opal. Maybe that will change. But I mean, yeah, keeping your eyes open is very difficult, I think. I mean, it's much easier not to keep your eyes open. I mean, for me, reflected in that poem, and I think in maybe most of my thinking right now, is just the sense that you can't do it by yourself. You can't keep your eyes open by yourself. Like that narrative, that lyric "I" in the middle of that poem is with her fellow citizens. You know, they're waving, they're actually acknowledging each other, despite the fact that they're putting down the umbrellas, which are no longer of use. But there's the acknowledgements that that's happening as a collective is very crucial to me. And so doing this kind of thing, especially in, you know, this whole theme is like COVID, that we cannot do this together in the same room, but we can still do this together. It's very, very important, I think.
Lavanya?
Yeah, hope is, well, I want to be hopeful, and I've been called a chronic pessimist, but I try to remain hopeful, and try to just say that there are good people, and that we should believe in that goodness, which is still there. I mean, it's there. Just if we can get to that point, and it's beyond the darkness, and it's just there. So so I try to tell my son to, you know, he asks me sometimes, why do people do bad things to each other all the time? Like when I put on the news, it's always like yesterday, Lebanon was in the news. And so every day we see a new city or a new country in the news for all the wrong reasons, and we send thoughts and prayers to that place. And it repeats. So it's tough to remain positive, but I think just trust in the humanness of all of us and the humanness within, and I think that should help somewhat. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I'm hoping that this week-long transnational conversation will just contribute a little bit towards that, because we're all, living through the same thing. We're all looking at the issues in our own spaces wherever we are. And I just thought it'd be helpful to bring people together in this way. So I just wanted to say thank you again, and thank you to everybody who came tonight. I just wanted to mention that tomorrow we have Jang Dim Dim, who will be reading. She's a poet, and because one of our writers unfortunately couldn't do it, I'm just substituting and just reading a very short prose piece of my protest, I guess. And that I also wanted to mention that we're recording all these sessions, so that after the week is over, Tammy will make sure that this is available, so you can all come back and hear it, and including the ones that you weren't able to hear. So thank you. Do come back tomorrow if you can. It's also 8 o'clock tomorrow evening in Hong Kong, which is 8 o'clock in the morning in New York, or what time is it elsewhere? Or 5 p.m. perhaps in India. So wherever you are, come join us and be a part of this. And hopefully Cha and myself at the Mongrel Writers Residence, my writers residence, which I couldn't open for real this year. So I thought I'll open it virtually. Let's just do it this way. We'll be able to do more in the future as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed having you. And thank you for a very provocative conversation, you two. It was wonderful. And let's give them a hand. Okay. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Collier. Thank you, Shu, and thank you, Tamara. Thank you for everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Miho says hi, and some familiar faces. Hi, all of you. Thank you. Sherry is here, and yeah, I'll catch up with them. Yeah, thank you. Right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Yeah, thank you.
So good night or good morning, wherever you are.
Yeah, yeah.